Hello, whisky lovers from around the world. Jock here from Scotch and Folk with another of our whisky talks. And today I have someone on the Skype line in the United States of America, in South Carolina, and it's Hans Offringa, the Dutch whisky writer. Probably the most well-known of Holland's whisky writers, and a writer of many whisky books, including 3 novels and a number of books on drawing. Hans has been a writer since 1974, and his most famous recent book is probably Whisky and Jazz, where he combines both of his passions, the drinking of Scotch whisky and jazz music. And now I would like to talk to Hans about his newest project that he's working on, his newest book, not a project, a book, and it's called Bourbon and Blues. So Hans, welcome. Cheers, by the way. We'll just hold up. So
nice to see you.
Nice.
Cheers.
And what are you drinking, Hans?
I'll show you the bottle. Since I'm working on the Bourbon and Blues book, I poured myself a Four Roses single barrel, which is a beautifully crafted whiskey.
Very appropriate. Very appropriate. I'm drinking a Scotch blend myself, Hedges and Butler. But anyway, good enough to talk about. Tell us, Hans, you're now in South Carolina. For the viewers of Scotch and Folk, for people who maybe don't know you, Hans lives in both Zwolle, a medieval town in the Netherlands, and in Charleston, a beautiful town in the grand old south of the United States. So how long are you there for, Hans? How long are you over in Charleston for?
A couple of months. Usually we are in the US 3 to 4 months a year, divided into separate sections, and the rest of the year we'll be in Europe, based in Zwolle, the Netherlands, as you said. Okay. Now, currently I'm sitting in my study in Charleston. I'm working on the Bourbon and Blues book, doing research, reading books, articles, interviewing people.
And I know that you were a great fan of John Lee Hooker and Buddy Guy and most of the greats that you learned when you were a young man, and you were a fan of Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Have you been interviewing anyone that knows them, or any famous blues players themselves?
Yes, I'm now working with a guy called Steve Simon. He's called the Blues Boss. Mm-hmm. He's been organizing blues festivals all over the world, and he introduced me to, for instance, Bruce Iglauer, who's the CEO and founder of Alligator Records. People who are interested in the blues, have a lot of vinyl, they will know who Alligator Records is. Coco Taylor was with Bruce Iglauer, for instance. I'm currently not interviewing blues musicians. That will be happening in a later stage. I'm just checking up with mainly with all the history of some great books here. You mentioned John Lee Hooker. I have the chapter on John Lee Hooker I've already written. It's called One Bourbon, One Scotch and One Bird. And that's the wild turkey, of course.
Oh, wow.
It'll be different than Whisky and Jazz, because I do combine blues musicians with bourbons, but in a slightly different way as I did in Whisky and Jazz. There will be chapters that are really intertwined. With Whisky and Jazz, I had separate sections on the musicians and separate sections on the distilleries, and then I blended them together. Here in the Bourbon and Blues book, each bourbon and musician is a separate chapter. Mm. The introductions will, of course, be the history between the histories of blues and the histories of bourbon. It's interesting to know that distilling came to us from North Africa, from the 7th century, via Western Europe, Spain, when the Moors came over. Now the blues came from Africa too, so you have a very nice starting point to compare them both. Mm.
And could you say that blues and bourbon, that they belong together? Are they really a drink are they really things that are associated with one another generally?
Yes, they are. Of course, a lot of blues musicians like to drink, but there are more issues where you can compare things, and that's. I don't want to give it away yet because that's one of the strongest points of the book, that I explain why I think they go well together, not just because the blues is associated with alcohol, but also the way in which both crafts were looked upon. For instance, I can give you an example. In the introduction, I explained that they're talking about the devil's music and the demon alcohol on one side. But on the other hand, Elijah Craig, one of the big bourbons, Elijah Craig himself was a preacher and a distiller. So there's a lot of duality here. And you see that also in the blues. The Reverend Gary Davis, he sang blues songs, secular songs, but he also sang what is called holy blues here.
Yeah, yeah. Gospel
So
blues.
there really are comparisons that are not too far-fetched.
Oh.
The book will also be not a coffee table style book, but it will be a narrative like my travel story, The Road to Galaxy. So it will be much more to read and less to look at, although it might include some nice old pictures of blues guys.
Oh, that sounds really nice. I can just imagine an old Gretsch guitar and a glass of bourbon. Beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you have a good idea for a cover, I haven't decided yet on a cover.
Okay. Now I know you play the bass guitar yourself, Hans. Do you still get have a little go at the bass?
Well, hardly ever. I used to play bass in a hard rock band in high school. Well, let's say from the four members, I was the least talented, and I ended up selling my bass and my amplifier for a couple of years later for 3 bottles of whiskey. I wouldn't do that now, but at the time I was in my early 20s, so I did that kind of stuff, yeah.
Okay. So you don't get to handle one nowadays. It's been a while since you've played the bass.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. Later, around my 35th birthday, I bought a tenor sax, and I taught myself to play the tenor saxophone because I became more and more interested in jazz, and I just wanted to find out how it worked because it's a different. It's tuned in another key. I can play a little bit of piano, but not spectacularly. I just wanted to know and learn how a saxophone worked. So I did that for a couple of years. I got lessons from a very talented female saxophone player. But the thing is, you have to play every day. We travel a lot, you lose your embouchure, you have to start all over again. So
Yeah.
I'm a writer, I'm not a musician. So I like to listen to music, but I stopped thinking about a possible career of playing myself.
Okay. I can imagine, Hans, that the surroundings that you're in now are very inspiring, both for bourbon and blues. Well, the South, the South Carolinas, maybe not Kentucky, but still it's the South. It's the great place for corn mash, and the blues coming from the deep South. Well, a great part of it anyway. Is it? Do you find this the surroundings that you're in right now to be inspiring for your writing?
Oh yes, they definitely are. And it always helps because I wrote Whiskey and Jazz 2 here. What I mean is the first versions of the manuscript, and then I can take it back to Europe and polish it more. But it's the same as my second novel is about Scotland mainly. It's not The Road to Purgatory, but it's another book. And I wrote the whole part of it in Scotland. And originally the story was only in the Netherlands, but then when I was in the Highlands, it just happened, and half of the book is now in Scotland. So it is a great influence where you are, also the people surrounding you.
Okay. And last question, Hans, because we're running out of time, I'm afraid. We only get 10 minutes, but what's the release date for the book, do you think?
Well, we plan either autumn, late autumn, or if it doesn't coincide with some major blues festival, we might postpone it to early 2011. Okay. The people who are now helping me here, they're in the promotion and organization of blues festivals, and they love the idea, and they offer their help for free, which is so good here in the South.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for talking to me, Hans, and well, as to you guys out there, it was this is Hans Offringa. Keep a lookout for his book coming, as he said, either in the autumn or in the early spring. Blues and Bourbon, right up your alley. Look out for it, and you'll find Hans's details right next to the video on YouTube. And until next time, cheers. Slán si bhfear. Cheers, Hans.